I've played with Ouija boards numerous times with different friend groups, and nothing interesting has ever happened. We'd either get no response, or it would just spell out random things. This past Thanksgiving, a friend came over, and after we finished eating dinner, we wanted to give this Ouija board another try. Just a quick note about us, for background context. My friend is an ex-Mormon who doesn't believe in the paranormal, and although I'm open to the idea of paranormal phenomena, I have yet to personally experience anything that would truly convince me. Before beginning, we set our intentions to speak to a positive spirit or spirits only, and we agreed not to do anything obnoxious or weird like make fun of the board / spirits or asking questions we shouldn't, like when will we die or how will we die, etc. To my surprise, the blanket began moving shortly after we asked the first question, and the connection seemed consistent from there. The atmosphere was relaxed and warm. Among an array of questions, we asked questions about the individual we were communicating with, and we also asked questions about ourselves that we knew the other person wouldn't know, and the board answered accurately. We were trying to think of some more questions when it started spelling out HELPME. Help me. I know this sounds so cliche, and if I ever write horror stories, I'm absolutely using this for the plot. It's something I couldn't even think of, even if I tried. The chill environment became a bit eerie following this, and we asked with slight apprehension, "How can we help you?" It responded with, "Quit." My friend looked genuinely nervous, and I felt on edge as well. We agreed to listen to the response, but after we asked the final question, we asked it if it could share why it wanted us to quit. The first letters were SH, and I assumed that it was going to tell us to shut up, but instead of going to the U, it ended up spelling out SHATAN. My friend looked confused, and I asked her if she knew what that word meant, and she said she didn't. She doesn't speak Arabic. I told her it means Satan in Arabic, and explained that it's a classification of a jinn in Islam. If the board meant Satan, as in the pitchfork dude, then we both already knew what that meant. Either way, it wasn't good, and we kept our promise and stopped after that last question. We made sure to thank the spirit for talking to us, and we said goodbye before closing the session. We know about the ideometer effect and or explanations for connecting with the subconscious, but I think it was particularly eerie that 1. It started responding as we tried to think of more questions. 2. We both thought that the board would spell shut up as it went to the S and H, but instead it spelled Shaitan. All in all, it was an interesting experience, but perhaps superstitiously, I almost feel like it was a warning to me to not keep messing around with Ouijas, provided that it truly was something supernatural and not the ideometer stuff. Would love to hear others' thoughts. Thank you for reading. For as long as I can remember, I've had an interest in the spiritual world and thought it would be cool to communicate with the dead. So back in 2014, my mom was browsing around the local FB buying-selling groups, and she came across someone selling a Ouija board that was used. It caught her attention because it was a glow-in-the-dark limited edition, and she decided to buy it for me. She'd remembered playing with one as a child, and thought I'd enjoy it too, since we'd talk about it in the past. My mom then contacted the seller, who would stop by and drop off the board. It was one of those stormy, gloomy, almost spooky days when the guy came to the house to bring us the board. As soon as I saw it, I got this bad vibe once the guy left. I told my mom, I don't feel safe using that. I want to do some research first. My mom was surprised at my reaction because before this point, I'd been interested in playing with it. I ended up surfing the web, watching YouTube videos, and hearing many stories, most which were bad, which made me feel very uncomfortable and even trying to mess with this Ouija board. My mom ended up packing it away in a box on our porch where it stayed many years. This brings us to spring of 2022. By now, I'd gotten really interested in the paranormal and had learned a lot about these Ouija boards and how dangerous they could be. So I reached out to my mom and asked, "Hey, you remember that Ouija board you put on the porch years ago? I think you need to get rid of it because I heard that just having one in the house can bring bad luck and negative energy. It's weird because since moving to this house in 2014, we hadn't had a lot of good experiences." She replied, "Oh, I got rid of it like the last time I was reorganizing the porch." So let's fast forward to the summer. I am back at my mom's house. I go to school in a different part of the country, but return to her house in the summer. Once back there, I started hearing strange stuff in my bedroom, like whispering. I thought perhaps it was just the air conditioner, but it honestly sounded like voices. And I never heard anything of the sort until that summer. I also had this weird sense of this Ouija board still being in the house. I decided to go try to find it on the porch. That's when I see the Ouija box, tucked away in a clear storage bin. I grabbed it and brought it to my mom. As we looked in the box, we noticed that it was different. The board and the box looked like they were brand new. When we opened it, the blanket was still in its own separate wrap. This was not how we remembered the board. When my mom got it from the guy, it had been used. The box had some wear and tear, and the blanket wasn't wrapped in anything. At this point, we're both just weirded out and just wanted that thing out of the house. I'd heard Ouija boards could come back and change if you don't properly dispose of them. For the time being, we put it in our backyard because we weren't sure how to get rid of it. We wanted it out of the house, but leaving it on our property wasn't a smart move on our part. Bad things started happening. The first thing was when my father got into a minor car accident. This was the only time in his life that he'd actually been in one, in all 45 years of his driving. Next, our basement flooded. Town sewage backed up into our basement. Nasty, I know. Before this, we had a dry basement, which had only gotten wet once due to someone leaving the window open during a very bad storm. The third thing was that when we had a handyman come over, he almost fell through our basement stairs. He wasn't hurt, but it really scared Mom. She ended up getting the stairs replaced, even though it was very expensive. Then another thing happened to my dad, which proved to be the scariest of all. There was a big fire in his apartment building. Multiple units were destroyed, including the one right above him. Thankfully, no one was injured. His unit did suffer some water damage, so he was forced to move out. It would take at least 6 months for renovations to his apartment, so he couldn't move back in right away. One final thing happened. While the Ouija board was still in the backyard, my mom and I noticed that we didn't have any hot water, so we went to the basement and discovered that the water heater wasn't working. We tried to reset it, but couldn't get it back on. A repairman came to check it out and told us that our unit had overheated. Fortunately, there was a safety setting to shut it off before it got dangerously hot. He then explained that the water heater's thermostat was faulty, or it should have never gotten that hot. If the safety switch hadn't shut it off, it could have blown up, and we were very lucky. One thing that I noticed is that even though all of these were close calls, no one was harmed. It was almost as if someone or something was watching out for us. After that last thing happened with our water heater, my mom and I agreed that we needed to get the Ouija board off of our property. It seemed to be bringing us bad luck, and we were worried that things were going to get even worse. Even my dad was having bad luck, although my parents were divorced, and he'd never lived in that house with us. My mom decided to get rid of the board. She planned to bring it to the town dump. She had separated the board from the blanket so she could toss them in two different garbage bins at the dump. As my mom was driving from the dump, she noticed something odd. At a neighbor's house down the street, there was a hearse parked in the driveway. A vintage hearse from the 1970s. She texted me about it, and I said, "That's weird, but people do buy old hearses sometimes." My mom then disposed of the Ouija board at the dump and headed home. On her way back, she drove past the neighbor's house and saw that the hearse was gone. There was only a dumpster that had been sitting in the driveway. My mom had never seen the hearse in the neighbor's driveway before that day and hasn't seen one since. The neighbor's driveway was too short for both the hearse and the dumpster to be parked at. Later that week, my mom and I were in Barnes & Noble and decided to have a coffee at the Starbucks there. Guess what we saw? When we dropped off our serving tray, tucked away near the milk and sugar, was a Ouija board. I know they sell them in Barnes & Noble, and I guess somebody could have just left it there. But it still totally freaked us out. So, a couple of years ago, I want to say like 2 or 3, me and my friend were bored. This was around the time that Ouija boards were a kind of a trend and going around on YouTube. And that kind of stuff has always, and still does, fascinate me. So we both decided to make a Ouija board out of a rectangle of cardboard that we had cut off of a box. I also believe that we made like a ghetto-looking blanket out of cardboard with a hole cut out in the middle and everything. So anyways, we brought the thing into the basement of my house. Already a huge mistake, as I learned after. And we started trying to mess around with this thing. I don't even remember what we asked it, or anything that really happened in detail, but I do remember being in such shock because I felt such a strong connection. Almost like a magnetic pull, pulling it down and moving it from underneath. Another thing that we both admitted was to feeling after we played for a little bit was a cold chill only on our arm that we were playing with. It wasn't really breezy, but it just felt like, well, bone-chilling. Anyways, the point of this story comes into play now. That night I was in the bedroom, and I got up to go to the washroom, which is straight across the hallway from my room, just to brush my teeth and get ready for bed, and I left my phone on my bed before leaving. So after I was done getting ready and all, I opened the bathroom door and immediately noticed that all of my lights in my bedroom were turned off. This threw up a major red flag in my mind right away, and while I was scared, I just thought it was nothing, and still went back to my room and flipped the lights on. I went to grab my phone to distract me from the adrenaline and tried to calm myself down before going to bed, and I didn't see it on my bed or anything. I didn't see it anywhere for that matter. I got creeped the fuck out and immediately flipped the lights off and jumped back into bed and hid under my covers and tried to go to sleep. Even though the thought that that Ouija board that we used in the basement earlier was in the closet 5 feet away from me. I swear I heard a faint knock on the inside of my closet, and I heard it multiple times that night. But maybe it was just my mind messing with me. The next morning, I wasn't as scared or freaked out as I was the night before, and I got up to take a shower. Once I got out of the shower, I stepped out of the bathroom, and my phone was just right there, on the floor, right in front of me. To this day, it still troubles me, and I have no idea what happened that night. I haven't touched the cardboard Ouija board, but I did purchase a legit Ouija board like 3 months later, and have not really had any outstanding experiences with it, like I had with the cardboard one. Let me know about your thoughts on this entire situation, or any of your own experiences with Ouija boards. was a regular Tuesday night. My parents were away, and I had the house to myself. I was chilling on the couch, binge watching a series, when I noticed something odd outside of my living room window. The street was dimly lit, but I could see what looked like a figure lurking near my neighbor's house. At first I thought it might be just one of their friends or a family member, you know, someone they would be expecting. But the longer I watched, the more uneasy I became. This person was just standing there, staring at their front door, but being the rational person I am, I dismissed it as my imagination running wild. As the night progressed, I got up and grabbed a snack from the kitchen. That's when I heard a creak, a subtle noise that sent chills down my spine. I froze. The front door was slightly ajar. Panic set in, and I immediately regretted not double-checking if I had locked it. I hesitated, debating whether to investigate or call the police. But curiosity got the best of me, and against my better judgment, I tiptoed toward the door. It swung open with a soft groan, revealing an eerie, quiet house. I heard a noise upstairs, like footsteps. My heart pounded as I realized someone was inside of my home. Fear gripped me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I retreated to the closet, my breath caught in my throat, praying that they wouldn't find me. From my hiding spot, I could hear the intruder moving through the rooms, searching for something. The tension was unbearable. I clutched my phone, ready to call help, when I heard a noise from downstairs. It was a door slamming shut. I strained to listen, and my blood ran cold as I heard a mistakable sound of a screaming echo through the night. My mind raced and I realized that the intruder hadn't found me, but had moved on to my neighbor's house. Guilt and relief washed over me in equal measure. I couldn't believe the horrifying turn of the events. I stayed hidden until I was sure that it was safe, and then, with shaky hands, I called the police. When they arrived, I explained what had happened. The reality hit me like a ton of bricks when they went next door. My neighbor, a kind elderly couple, had been brutally attacked. The scene was something out of a nightmare. It wasn't a random break-in. The intruder had specifically targeted them. The investigation unfolded, and the police caught the perpetrator. Turns out, he had a twisted motive and had mistaken my house for theirs. It's a chilling realization that I narrowly escaped a fate that befell my neighbors. The guilt still lingers, wondering if there was anything I could have done differently. The randomness of it all, the fact that a simple twist of fate saved my life that night, is a haunting thought. It's a reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, survival is just a matter of luck. So there you have it. The night I narrowly avoided a killer, but couldn't prevent the tragedy that unfolded next door. Life can be strange and scarier than any horror movie. Stay safe, everyone. I was 13 when this happened, and it still gives me nightmares thinking about it. My parents wanted to go out on a date, so they left me home on a Friday night. I am an only child, so I stayed home alone. We had a one-story with a daylight basement that had its own entrance. We live on a dead-end street, and it's pretty quiet in the evenings, so not many cars come and go. My neighbors are pretty close to my house too, so I didn't feel uncomfortable being home alone by myself. So my parents left around 6 p.m. for their dinner reservation, and I had a nice hot pizza delivered and was ready to watch some scary movies, all by myself. I was excited. I locked the door behind them and popped on the TV. I was scrolling through the movies on the Roku and decided to watch one of the Halloween movies first. I snuggled in my nice, warm, fuzzy blanket on the couch, got comfy, and began my night alone. About an hour passed and I got up to use the bathroom. While in the bathroom, I thought I heard some noises coming from the basement. It sounded like something was moving around, but I figured I was just home alone. What could it possibly be? So I just brushed it off as nothing. I finished in the bathroom and went back onto the couch to finish my movie. Another 5 minutes had passed, and again, moving noises in the basement. Now I started getting a nervous feeling in my gut. I stopped the movie to listen to more noises. What is that? I thought about that entrance door down there and wondered if it was locked. I assumed my parents locked it. I hoped that they did. I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath and decided to walk towards the basement and put my ear to the door. What a mistake. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I froze in fear. This has never happened to me before. I have been home alone in the past, but mostly during the day. I know the obvious thing was to call the police, but did I do that? No. I ran outside and went to my neighbor's house and banged on their door. Thankfully, they were home and they let me in. I was out of breath, scared, and couldn't get out my words fast enough. I asked them to please call the cops. There is someone in my house. Hurry, please. They called 911, and the cops came over within 10 minutes. I also called my parents to let them know what was going on. I let the cops check out the house, and I stayed at my neighbor's where I felt safe. After some time, one of the cops came over to my neighbor's house and said they didn't find anyone in the house, but did say that whoever it was came in through the basement entrance. It must have been unlocked. Nothing was taken and everything was in its place. My parents got home and of course they were very upset and scared. The cops assured us that the house was clear to please lock all of our doors and windows at all times. They think this person saw my parents leave and assumed that the house was empty. I don't want to think about the fact that this person might have known that I was home alone. After some thought, my mom said, "Oh no, I don't think we locked the basement door." She just assumed since we lived in a quiet neighborhood that we were safe, so she didn't really have to worry about it. Needless to say, after this night, we all made sure that every single door and window stayed locked. They still leave me alone, but they let the next door neighbors know when they do, just in case. I still think about this night, and it gives me nightmares. I am 16 now, and I feel a little uneasy being home alone. But I know I need to get over it. Please stay safe out there, and always lock your doors. You don't know who is lurking around your neighborhood. So, to start off, this story still freaks me out to this day, because I don't have any answers that make sense. Maybe y'all can help me. Just decipher the following events and come up with some kind of logical explanation. This happened several years ago, when I was still with my ex, and we were living in a small city. Naturally, we were watching creepypasta videos on YouTube before bed. And there was one particular video that freaked me out so badly, I couldn't sleep that night. Unfortunately, I had to work early in the morning and knew watching those videos before bed was a horrible idea. As I laid on my ex's chest, trying to fall asleep, I heard a loud crash coming from downstairs in the basement. The way my old house was mapped out, it's first floor with a huge unfinished basement, and you can hear every little sound from our bedroom through the vents. When I say the sound was loud, I mean I thought something big had somehow gotten into the basement and was going on a rampage. I whispered for him to wake up, but I knew it wouldn't be any use. That man could sleep through anything, even when his lady possibly needed rescuing. At this point, I'm shaking like crazy and debating whether or not I should stay in bed and hope it was just my imagination, or go investigate. Finally, I bucked up the courage and, as quiet as possible, scooted myself out of bed and stepped as lightly as I could toward the door. By now, my ex wakes up as I go to grab a baseball bat. We kept across the room for protection. Babe, what the hell are you doing? Come back to bed. There's something down in the basement, I loudly whispered to him. Then I heard something else fall in the basement, and that got my ex's attention, as he proceeds to tell me he's not going down there. So, here's this 5'3" girl in an oversized t-shirt grabbing a hold of a baseball bat as her 6'1" boyfriend lays in bed. Fucking coward. I opened the bedroom door as quietly as I could, as I listened harder to my surroundings. My heart was in my throat as I got down on all fours, literally crawling across my living room floor to be as quiet as humanly possible. As I continued to crawl, while somehow still carrying the bat, I reached the kitchen linoleum and stopped short when I hear something behind me. Panic took over as I grabbed the bat tightly and went to swing back when I heard my ex's voice yell at me. "Whoa, babe, stop, it's me." Now he decides to get out of bed and help. My hero, all right. He got me up from the floor as we slowly walked toward the basement door. With the bat drawn back as he opens the basement door, he yells down that we are armed, and they better go back the same way that they got in. Waiting for a couple minutes and still hearing something downstairs, my ex opened the door and flicked on the basement light. We were honestly expecting like someone darting across the floor, or worst case scenario, come right up at us. But nothing like that happened. Honestly, nothing happened. We went down to the basement as carefully as possible, but there was no sign of an intruder in the entire house. My art supplies and paints were scattered all over the floor, and my easel was turned over. But no footprints, broken glass, absolutely nothing. And that's what scares me to this day. The basement window was closed and locked, and it still had dust all over it. We looked all over the entire basement, but still nothing. The next day, as I'm leaving for work, our elderly neighbor stops me and asks if we had heard any screaming coming from the back. Our backyards are shared. I asked him, "What screaming?" We didn't hear any screaming. Apparently our neighbor heard yelling and screaming late that night, around the same time that my basement got flipped upside down, and called the police to investigate, although they found nothing to meet his claims. Could those screams be somehow connected to our possible intruder, or something else entirely? I honestly have no idea, but that event has me still asking questions to this very day. Bearing this job is kind of a burden because I get calls every day, and sometimes it's just stressful. However, this last week has just been busy, if I could say. There have been numerous UFO sightings here in Michigan, and people have been saying weird things have been occurring, such as humanoids standing behind trees and just observing. I've always believed that these were just conspiracies started by madmen, and probably even just the government, just to get people's minds off of the government's response to the pandemic. At least, that's what I thought until now. Now, whatever I'm about to tell you is gonna sound batshit crazy, but I swear to God that this is true. I was sitting in my chair, relaxing, eating some chips, because I didn't have time for dinner. Each bite the chip made was just an echoing sound through the building, as I slowly devoured it, listening to the rain outside. Most of our colleagues had already left, and I was alone in the building. It was pretty dark outside, and the only thing that illuminated the surroundings was the bright moon and street poles. The day was less busy than usual, and I barely received any calls. I was finally at relief that all the shit that was going on in the town was over. Until that damn phone started ringing. I quickly answered it, putting my chip down.
911, what is your emergency?
Hi, I think I just saw people robbing my neighbor's house. I just saw people break open the door, and I think they're looting his place.
Alright, sir. Can you please tell me your address?
Yeah, sure, of course. He proceeded to tell me his address calmly, despite the ongoing robbery next door.
Thank you, sir. The police will arrive soon. Please stay on the line till then.
All right.
Is your neighbor alright, or...
Well, he's on vacation, so there's no one in his house.
Alright, sir. Can you describe what the robbers are doing?
Yeah, one sec. I listened closely to the noise from his phone, but I couldn't make out anything apart from the occasional loud breathing of the caller. They're just walking around, I guess. It sort of seems like they're just searching for something, but can't find it.
Alright, sir. Try to stay low, so they don't see you.
Yeah. Wait. They're leaving the house. A few seconds had passed until I heard his voice again. There's 4 of them. Yeah, it's 4.
Can you describe their appearance?
One sec, let me get closer. I heard the caller shuffle through his house, probably going to the nearby window with a better view. They look off.
Sir, can you be a bit more descriptive than off?
Well, I mean, they're tall. All of them are like at least 6'8" or something like that.
Alright, that's a start. What are they doing now?
My heart began to pound. How the fuck is someone 6'8"? I knew something was wrong from the way the situation sounded, but I tried to remain as calm as possible. They're saying something to each other. I can hear them murmuring, but I don't think they're talking in like English or whatever.
Alright, just keep an eye on them and...
Shit! I think they're coming this way. Oh shit! They're coming towards my house.
Sir, can you please check all the doors and windows? Please make sure they're locked.
The adrenaline began to hit. What the fuck was going on? What the fuck was I gonna do? I'm just sitting here, trying to help this guy till the cops get there.
Sir?
He didn't respond.
Sir, are you with...
Yeah, I'm here.
Are all your windows and doors closed? Can you confirm there is no point of entry for the intruders?
Yeah, everything's closed. I don't think they can get in.
Alright, sir. Now I need you to listen to me.
Yeah, I'm all ears. I could hear his voice trembling. He was scared shitless. Heck, who wouldn't be in this type of situation if the robbers were fucking 6'8"?
Sir, do you have any place in your house where you can hide?
I guess my basement.
Alright, sir. Please go to your basement as quietly as possible. And don't let them see you.
Give me a second. I could hear him moving as the floor made a couple quiet creaks. I'm in.
right, sir. Try to be as quiet as possible now. They might be...
The sound of a loud crash pierced my ear. I knew something was wrong. This guy was in trouble. I couldn't even give him the assurance that the cops would be there on time, because the roads were all snowy.
Sir, what was that?
They're in my fucking house. They just broke into my fucking house. Fuck, I've been doing this job for 2 years, and I've never had a call like this. Most of my calls were just normal day-to-day crap, except this.
Sir, the police are on their way. They should be at your house in 2 minutes. I just need you to...
Shit. I think they're checking all the rooms.
Sir, please stay where you are until the police arrive.
Yeah, all right.
Sir, is there a weapon near you?
Wait, let me check. I heard him shuffle through the room, trying to make no noise. Yeah, there's a baseball bat.
All right, sir. Please try to use that to keep yourself safe in case anything happens.
Yeah, okay. A few seconds had passed, without us talking. I sat on the chair biting my nails, till I heard a sound. I'm sorry.
Sir?
I could hear him whimpering. I'm probably the worst caller you've had in a long time. It's like I shoved you into this situation.
Sir, it's my job to do this.
I know, but you probably would have been on some regular night if it wasn't for me. I paused for some time. He was telling the truth. I would have had a regular Friday. I probably would have gone home in a few minutes and binged some Netflix or something. But this was who I am. I save people, and I was determined to save this guy. I looked at the screen in front of me, displaying these coordinates of the police and the caller's details.
Brody, I promise you, you're gonna be safe.
I hope so. Thanks for all this.
No problem, sir.
He went silent for a while. I guess it was probably because the intruders were getting close to the basement. They're trying to open the fucking door. That was it. I had no idea what to do anymore.
Sir, please stay calm. Try to make no noise, and if they get close to you, just...
I heard a huge thud from the caller. They got in. Fuck. I looked at the coordinates of the police car. It was at the end of the street. He began screaming, and I could hear footsteps approaching him. What's wrong with their fucking faces? Everything's fucking pale.
Sir, please calm down. I need you to stay.
They're not human. The line was cut. The police arrived to his house just a couple of seconds later, but there was no sign of him. However, they did find a circle shape imprinted in the lawn of the neighbor's house. My caller has been placed on the missing list, but no one has come to spot him yet. He's pretty much deemed dead. People think robbers killed him and hid his body. But I know what happened that night. Those things took him. Sorry ahead of time for any format issues. I'm posting this from my cell phone. So, for context, I'm 22 and a male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll save those for another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and my wife. Nothing special was going on that night, just the usual. I get a ride request and it was just a pickup, kind of from a lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and I find my passenger. He has all of his belongings. several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all of his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride, he's crying about his girlfriend. She had just cheated on him. He had walked in on them earlier that night, and he couldn't stay there because the apartment was in her name, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in the city, we have a street that is well known for having vices, if you know what I mean. Hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels. The whole works. We get to the motel, and he asks me to wait there for him while he checks in and gets a key. Yeah, no problem, man, I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little bit when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden and concealed in a holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat, just for protection. Reason being is, driving for Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives pulled on me, guns pulled on me, as well as people have tried to fight me or rob me, all kinds of other things. But like I said, that's for another time. This motel was on street level. It was on the street that I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere, and there was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm. He was passed out against the building. And I'm a big fan of these true crimes and horror narrations, so I'm kind of on edge. He gets his key and the whole motel is on ground level, so I help the guy out and I drive up to the door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload all of his stuff. While on the second trip of getting this stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room that was next to me, not even my passenger's room. One of the ladies started pounding on the door and then opened it. That's when I saw the guy raise a fucking shotgun from under his long coat, stormed into the room, with the two ladies following him, and slamming the door behind them. Following that, I heard a whole bunch of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for that shotgun to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up from behind me. I can take the rest of these, man. Just go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas. And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice that he took the rest of the boxes in, or the boxes out of my hand and slid a $5 bill in my pocket. I was still just frozen. I knew what may have been going down in there. I had to leave, or at least get where I could have my own gun. I know that that guy and both of those ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there, and fast. You know, no witnesses and everything. I got in my car and sped off quickly. I got about a block or so away, and then I called the cops. I gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women. They never answered the door I saw them come out of. And the occupants of that room that they went into said nothing had happened and that I was full of shit. Well, I know what I saw. Crazy guy took a shotgun into a hotel room and raised it upon entering, closing the door behind him. I won't ever go back down that road again. At the time of this story, I was young enough to be excited to see Santa Claus, and still wanted my picture taken on his lap. But at the same time, I was old enough to know that he wasn't real. My whole family was at Grandma's house in Chapel Hill on a Friday after Thanksgiving. Our tradition was to go to the mall, see all of the sales prices, seek out some deals for some clothes and gifts. Black Friday is always the beginning of the holidays for the shopping frenzies. As soon as we entered the main gallery of the mall, I saw Santa sitting in his chair with a Christmas tree on both sides of him, and boxes of wrapped presents with big red bows. There were white reindeer, which had bright colored lights, and a sparkling snowman. Santa sat with rosy cheeks and a big smile, chuckling with some of the children on his lap. He was the perfect Santa, with a little twinkle in his eye. Even if it was a fake white beard, I could easily see. I was so excited, and I screamed, "Santa! Mom, look, it's Santa! Can we please get a picture?" She then looked at the 10-mile-long line and said, "Maybe later, dear, if that line isn't so long. Let's shop for right now." We shopped all morning, and then had lunch at California Pizza Kitchen, a favorite place, and continued trying on clothes in the afternoon. I was so tired, and we rested at the cookie company, Crumble, where I had a snickerdoodle cupcake. It was so delicious. As we re-entered the mall, I saw Santa again. This time there was no line at all. I begged Mom, "Please, please, let me tell Santa what I want for Christmas." We walked over, and Mom put $5 in the tip box, held by a plastic elf. I ran up to Santa, and he grabbed me roughly under my arm and yanked me off my feet onto his lap. He was squeezing me very uncomfortably and saying, "Cute little girl, touch Santa. Let's smile." I looked up into his eyes. It wasn't kindly, red, cheeky smile Santa anymore. The Santa was bloodshot-eyed. He had stains and a dirty brown beard. His teeth were rotted, and his breath stunk like an outhouse. I tried to wiggle free, but he kept holding me so tightly against his body. I looked at my mom, who was ready to take the picture with her iPhone. She saw the terror, and she screamed, "Let my daughter go, you creep." She grabbed my arm and pulled me away from his grip. He fell to the floor in a drunken pool of saliva, his beard hanging around his neck. He staggered off and disappeared into the mall. The real Santa was found unconscious and stripped of his costume. He had been mugged on his break, and the fake Santa was never found. This is my chilling nightmare, and a reason I'm afraid of Santa. Personally, the last half of 2017 has been pretty exhausting. The most draining part, both emotionally, physically, and mentally, has been the laborious task of moving my father into an aged care facility due to his rapid advancing dementia. He lives in Tasmania, where I grew up. I am currently living and working in Brisbane, which is about 2,500 kilometers or 1,500 miles for you Imperials, to the north of Tasmania. I have been making the 3.5-hour flight down to Tasmania about 2 times a month to sort out through all of my dad's stuff in his situation. I have been busying myself by fixing up his empty, dilapidated home in order to get it ready to be sold. I moved out all of his furniture and his belongings, except for this pile of blankets and pillows, which I have turned into a makeshift bed on the floor while I'm visiting. The house is situated in a semi-rural area, surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes. It's an old house, it's damp, everything creaks, there is currently no electricity, which makes the nighttime very creepy. The house is not very secure. No alarm system. The doors do have locks, but if you forcefully nudge on them, it'll pop up the door right open. I flew in on Christmas Eve. It was in the late evening when I picked up my car that I rented to make the hour-long drive down to his house. I stopped in at my mate's place, who lived about 10 minutes away from my dad's place, just to have a few beers and shoot the shit about the year that has just passed. After a couple of hours, I realized that I was definitely surpassed in the legal limit to drive. So my mate's legendary wife dropped me off at my dad's house and offered to come pick me up in the morning, so then I can go back to their place and pick up my car. Definitely a Christmas miracle. I entered my dad's house around midnight. Inside the house was basically pitch black, and in my slightly drunken state, I flipped the light switch on and nothing happened. Oh yeah, that's right, no power. Using my phone as a light to navigate my way through the house, I noticed that the other tools that I had laying out all around had been gone. Stolen, to be exact. I sighed and accepted the fact of it was my own stupid fault for leaving them out in an unsecured house. Some kids probably noticed that no one was living there anymore and took advantage of the situation. It was unsettling knowing that somebody else has been in the house, but I didn't bother calling the police over a hammer, a wrench, a screwdriver. That probably came out to a grand total of like $16.50. Good news was that the big toolbox that I kept locked up in the laundry room, with all of my more expensive power tools, was still there and intact. I studied the padlock and the space around it. It looked pretty scratched and dented, like someone did try to get into it. Nice try, dickheads, I said aloud to myself. The toolbox is very big and heavy. Not one single person can just carry it, unless you're like Andre the fucking Giant or something. Exhausted, I went into one of the furniture-less rooms and made my makeshift bed out of the blankets and pillows. I couldn't get comfortable, and it was taking a while to drift off to sleep. As I was laying there, the only sound that I could hear over my ringing tinnitus was a gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. I could also hear what sounded like an unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel. I tried to listen harder. Then there was a loud gong sound of something solid coming into the contact of the metal railing that leads up to the back door. This makes me sit up wide-eyed, with my heart rate starting to pump. Maybe it was just a wallaby, or a possum. I sat there still as possible, just listening. I can hear the sound of the trees and the wind, nothing else for a few moments, and I started to calm down. This is interrupted by a pop and a squeak on the back door being pushed open. Fuck. I freeze, not knowing what to do. I could hear footsteps creaking through the back of the house, and I hear the laundry room open up. I was up on the other end of the hallway, but I could hear whispering. The only words that I could honestly make out was, "There! Shh! Quick!" I pull myself together and pull out my phone and call the police. I explain the situation to the dispatcher, and she says that the police are on their way. While this is happening, I can hear a chink type of sound, and I'm assuming they're trying to mess with the lock on my toolbox, trying to break it open. The dispatcher suggests that I lock the door in that room. I agree, and then I slowly pad over to that door. One of the floorboard creaks so loudly, I freeze and hear a dead silence from that laundry room. They must have heard me. After about 30 minutes of standing still, I try to take another step, and yet another high-pitched creak. But this seems to work in my favor, because I hear a new house guest scatter away out the back door. I lock the bedroom door and tell the dispatcher that I think they have gone. She tells me to stay put until the police arrive, and I tell her I'm more than happy to comply. After about 5 minutes of waiting, the cops arrive, and the dispatcher bids me a farewell. The police did a search on the area and found nothing, as expected. They had tried to break into my toolbox. One of the cops says, "Why didn't they just try bolt cutters? Fucking amateurs." And we have a little laugh. I explained to the police that when I did come home originally, that all the tools that I left were stolen, and that the toolbox looked like it was already attempted to break into. Upon hearing that, the cop stated his theory, that they probably broke in earlier that night before you got there. They grabbed what they could and tried to open the box, and when they couldn't, they left to go get something to open it up with. While they were gone, you came home. And then when they arrived here to open up the toolbox, you were already here. I doubt they were dangerous, though. Probably just some kids. Good timing, I think to myself. I make a report, and that's that. I stayed up until sunrise, and then decided to get a couple hours of sleep until my mate's wife, Lucy, came to pick me up so I can go get my car. I asked if I can keep my tools there at their place just for safekeeping. I drove down to my dad's old folks' home and had Christmas lunch with him and his new elderly buddies. The following day, I go to the hardware store and purchase some newer, sturdier door locks. In the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, Quantico, southern Ontario. These are a massive wilderness area of lakes and land. I was working for the Boy Scouts, and we were based on Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of that summer was typical, but one expedition in particular still haunts me as a result of what happened to us over those course of days. Here is the account in full. My crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us total, the maximum amount allowed in a group per hour permit. There were 6 scouts, 2 adults, advisors, which were scoutmasters, and myself. They had wanted to do a 200-miler, but didn't have the physical ability to, so we had to amend our route. They were bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so the waterfall is somewhat rare, but that decision would end up putting us in the path of something. We visited the falls and camped near it. That evening I had the boys working on the camp setup, while us advisors worked on the fire for dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of down trees, bush, and bramble. I could faintly hear the falls off to my left, when out of nowhere, I heard the most unearthly scream roar I've ever heard. It stopped me dead in my tracks, and I was frozen. The second scream was closer, and then the third closer. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush, but whatever it was coming directly at me. By the fourth scream, I could feel it in my chest. I got nauseous and involuntarily barked at it. I've never before or since heard that sound come out of my body. The fifth scream was almost physically hurting me, but it snapped me back to reality, and I ran back to the camp. My crew had heard it too, but what am I to tell them? I claimed it was just a boar. There are no boar up here, and the advisors knew I was lying, but didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock about 50 yards away from the camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock about head height, if I had to say, so about 60 feet up. I would use a tarp over my body and my head to keep the morning dew off and the morning mosquitoes at bay. But that tarp wasn't strung up. That's important. It was just loosely over me. It must have been around 3 or 4 a.m. when I was awakened by a sound that sounded like a crying woman. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the same time, I'm hearing something walking through the thick brush down past my feet. So I listen, totally still and quiet, as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from the brush to the granite rock, but could still hear heavy footfalls as it walked right through the camp and on towards me. At this point, the tarp is still over my head, so I can't see a thing, and I don't know what to do. In no time, it was standing right next to me. I could hear the breathing, loud and congested sounding. I could smell the musk. I could feel its enormous presence only inches from my body, just standing there. Time to make a decision. I suddenly threw the tarp off of my head, and as I did, my left arm touched this thing in the chest. It was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large, upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. The muscular build was impressive. Bodybuilder status in the pectoral region that I touched. It all happened in a second, and as soon as my head made contact, it bolted back into the brush with immense speed for these thick debris. By the time I got my headlamp on, it was gone. My crew had slept through it all, so I read until the sun came up and decided not to mention it. The next day we moved a few miles towards the base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designated by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole. We were just arriving and it was evening. One of the adult advisors needed to visit the grumper, so he walked towards it. About 2 minutes later, we heard him yelling, and he came running back to the camp, still pulling his pants up, and said that he had saw a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked if maybe it was just a bear, but he said absolutely not. That he'd hunted bear for years, and it was no bear. He said that it looked like a monkey, about 9 feet tall. At this height estimate, I'm imagining being back in my hammock. If I touched its chest, and I was about 6 feet off the ground, that puts the head close up to 9 feet. Was it stalking us? Was there more than just one? The boys are now scared. Time to mediate. I suggested night paddle. No one's sleeping anymore anyway. So we pack back up and set out for around 8 p.m. and paddle by headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back onto Moose Lake and camp very near the base, so we could be the first crew off the water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to Newfoundland Lake by a small pinch and a channel. It's not very deep or wide. There's dark woods on both sides. We were right in the middle of the pinch when a rock the size of a basketball came flying out of the woods on the right side and narrowly missed the bow of the canoe I was steering. There's no cliffs there. This thing was forcefully thrown at us from the tree line. At this, we paddled like hell. We paddled to the center of the Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and we sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled back to the base camp and ended our expedition. They did not want to talk about what happened, and I was okay with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard, helping other crews load off. My buddy Justin got back that day from the trip, in the same area that we had been in, which was Bear Loop, and as I was helping him put the boat on the rack, I noticed that he had this distant look, almost a 1,000-yard stare. I asked him how his trip went, and he said that it was all good until they hit Knife Lake, Newfoundland Lake. He said that they were being messed with for 2 nights on Knife, and then had a huge rock thrown at them on the Newfoundland bench. Sure enough, for the solid 2 weeks after, the crews kept coming back from that area with very similar stories. One night there was a crowd of us guides in the staff lodge, swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. Screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then in the back of the corner of the room, I heard a chuckle. It's one of the old veteran guides who had been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It's about time somebody else saw one." I asked how long he'd known that they were there. He said that he's been encountering them for at least 10 years. Then he said, "They talked to me." This shocked me. Like a language? I asked. No, they communicate telepathically. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you. But they can read you, and they like when you're afraid. It's like a game to them. What happened out there is still a big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatch. Their existence was never a huge stretch for me. But what really sticks with me is the way that veteran guide spoke of their intelligence and parapsychological abilities. That they can just read human emotion as clear as pages in a book. They know our species better than we know ourselves. Exploring abandoned houses has always been a hobby of mine that I share with my best friend Justin. Oregon is known to have a lot of abandoned towns, and in 2018 we stumbled upon one. It was filled with crumbling houses, churches, and various outbuildings. After looking in a lot of windows and stepping inside some of the safer looking structures, we decided to check out one of the biggest and creepiest of them all. Walking inside this place immediately unsettled us. It was like walking into a scene from an apocalypse movie. Several bunk beds, ripped mattresses, couches, soiled, forgotten toys, deteriorating children's books, and more were all strung in this large, disgusting room. An entire wall of small cribs were bolted in rows. Justin and I both got really sad. It was like a forgotten orphanage, and it was similar to an animal pound. It was clear that we weren't the first visitors since the original residents up and left. There were graffiti all over the walls, broken bottles, and old destroyed microwaves. Thoroughly creeped out, we decided to head back to the car. We weren't even about 5 feet out of the door when this piercing noise came from right behind us, right in the middle of this orphanage room that we had just left. I can only describe the noise as 100 of rats screaming in torturous pain. It was coming from that stupid microwave, and it was loud. My friend Justin is definitely that type of person who would die in the horror movie, because he immediately went back in to investigate. The ancient appliance was smashed open, bent, and almost undecipherable, including the power cord, which had been cut and ripped out. There was no reason, no sense, or explanation in this blood-curdling scream coming from that microwave. Covering my ears and filled with a sense of intense fear, I begged him to get the fuck out of there. We hightailed it out of there through this overgrown woods-looking area, both white as a sheet and shaking. It was only when we put a few miles in between us and this dreadful place that we started laughing our asses off while walking back through the woods. Who the hell can say that they've seen a haunted microwave? I laugh about it even still. But the pure terror and sense of dread that I felt that day will always stick with me. Something was not right in that place. I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaskan Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness, for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test the rock formations for their oil production qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say it hadn't come up yet, I mean almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of the Alpine, deep in the wilderness. Our job took about a week, but we finished and we were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and the end of the ice roads are guard shacks, and you have to check in and check out for safety. No cell reception, and the radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 a.m, not that it really mattered in the land of endless night. But we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow as the speed limit on these roads was only about 25 miles per hour. When something appeared in the road in our headlights. It was a man, in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket, walking down the ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m. and negative 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for these local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down, or he's trying to just get back to the guard shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up on him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothes, while totally not appropriate for these extreme weathers, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed that he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, and still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a particular smell coming off of him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that just made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had enough of all of this. He rolled down the window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said that he was just going to try to shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could even reach him, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At this moment, this guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in this scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out in the ice before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude was still a hold of my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held on to my buddy to try to keep him inside. After several moments, it could have only been a few seconds at most, my buddy tore free from this guy and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruisings in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guards and were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at this shack, we asked him if he saw that Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us that he searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing. Not even tracks in the snow leading off of the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste his shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would have made up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude, if he even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of many of my weird stories from my time up there. I'll work to write down more of my experiences and share them to the appropriate subs. I live pretty far away from anyone, and mostly surrounded by the forest. I hunt regularly and spend a lot of time outside when not running my business. But it was early during the hunting season and around 3 a.m. I was tracking deer prints, and they just stopped, and an uneasy feeling filled me as something compelled me to look up. In the tree was a deer, or what was left of it. It was gutted, but not like how a human hunter would have. So I decided to just call it there and headed back. As I was making my way to my truck, I still felt uneasy and as if I was being watched. I would periodically look back and check with my nods, and caught two very big and very high up eyes looking back, followed by a type of deer yell. Not a roar or a scream, but a yell. It didn't sound like a bear or a big cat, but like a big man, a very big man. I took off running and didn't look back. It was a 4-mile run back to my truck, and I didn't stop once. When I made it back and drove off, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw again something standing silhouetted by the sunrise. When I made it home, I was still shaken up a little bit and decided to look over at my truck. Now I'm a fairly big guy, standing 6'6" and weighing about, if I had to say, 230 pounds. And there were handprints bigger than my hands on my truck. Doing some more investigating, I checked my trail cams and found several offline, and one pointed at the deer that hung up in the tree. Now, being someone who's seen a lot of horror movies, and being one to not mess up with something I can't understand, I never went back to that part of the woods, and eventually decided to move altogether, as at night I would hear that yell in my dreams. Sometimes my wife would tell me that she felt like someone was watching her from the tree line as well, and being a new parent, I didn't want to take any chances. This happened to me a few years ago during winter. I live near a lake, more of a pond really. But this isn't a post debating logistics of what makes a lake a lake. Right up the road is a small hill that leads up to a hiking trail. I know this trail like the back of my hand. One night, I decided to go on a hike. It had just snowed, and there was a full moon, and like a Disney princess, the cold never bothered me anyway. It was a little slippery going up the hill. The trail was a little bit buried under the snow, but it's a full circle, so it's impossible to get lost. I got going and finally made it to the part of the trail where it's covered by trees. But being wintertime, it more resembles bony hands reaching towards the heavens. This is when I saw it. I saw a silver light shining in the distance. The way it moved, I assured it was some type of trash caught in a tree. But the closer I got, the more it began to take shape. I got about 500 to 600 feet away when I saw it was a woman. She was in a silver dress, a real fancy looking one. It's definitely not something that anyone would wear in this type of weather. As I got close, I could see she looked like she was crying. I assumed she was lost in some type of danger. I called out to her, but she paid me no attention. I began to walk closer to her, and as I did, she began to walk toward the lake. It's a pretty steep drop off that lake from where she was. I began to run after her to see if I could help, but by the time I reached her, or where she was, there was nothing or no one around. I looked all around and even climbed down where she would have fallen, but nothing. Not even prints in the snow, except for mine. By the time it dawned on me, there was no trace of her even being here. I heard a scream like nothing I have ever heard before. I look up to see the woman just walking on the water. It may have snowed, but it definitely wasn't cold enough for this lake to freeze. I stood there frozen in fear as it dawned on me what I was seeing. She let out one more scream before sinking under the lake. I hightailed it back to the trail and back to my home in record time. I'm not even sure what I just saw. I don't even know if it was real. I've never gone back at night hiking, and even now, I never go alone, even in the day. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life in rural Idaho as a farmer and rancher. He had tons of old cowboy stories he would tell us grandkids. Most of them were funny. Some of them were cautionary, but a few were just downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At that time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, now mostly a ghost town. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. They had hitched sleighs to their horses and headed down to the Porterneuf River to ice skate. There were 8 kids altogether, and they were excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were 3 Robinson kids, Tommy Bayer, and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was next door to the Gooch's ranch. The river was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to get thicker, and if they did fall through, they would just get their legs wet. The kids spent a couple hours skating when a loud scream came from the willow bush on the riverbank opposite of them. The kids could only watch as a giant man, covered head and toe with thick black fur, came lumbering out of the bushes. It was carrying a large tree branch and was screaming in rage at the kids. They fled towards their sleighs, trying to scramble up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest one, was at the back of the rush. He couldn't get a good foothold because of the skates and fell back towards the ice. The giant was now crossing the river towards them, screaming and swinging his tree branch. My grandpa was sure that this creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa tells it, Lady Luck smiled down to me on that day by the river, because as the giant was midway across the river, the ice gave way. It only submerged its shins, but was slowed down considerably as it tried to get up, back on top of the ice. This gave my grandpa's brother enough time to jump down and cut the laces of my grandpa's skates. They left the skates and dashed back up the riverbank and jumped onto the sleigh. As they looked back, the giant man was cresting the riverbank. To their relief, it didn't chase the sleighs. It just stood there, hollering at the kids and swinging its tree branch. The kids were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told their encounter to John Gooch, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly in the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. Where the kids had been skating, there was found footprints almost 2 feet in length. My grandpa's skates were also found near the tracks. They had both been bent in half, like a horseshoe. The tracks headed west into a nearby mountain range. The posse followed them as far as they could, but the deep snow prevented them from traveling further. The creature was never sighted in that area again. The story captivated a small community, and soon word traveled across the country, known as the Idaho Wild Man. That spring, my great-grandfather decided to buy a ranch in the Little Lost River Valley, farther north in Idaho. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said that this encounter frightened him the most. He was sure he would have been killed if the giant hadn't broken through that ice and given his brother a chance to cut his laces. I'm not the type of person to believe this kind of stuff, especially because I'm not superstitious at all. But these 2 encounters made me doubt whatever's going on this farm. The first encounter occurred when me and my 2 friends were having dinner. Everything was calm. We were eating outside, since this was a relatively big space, That was until we heard a woman scream, which was extremely odd, since the country I live in is very calm, with very few criminality or even animal attacks, since we were in the wilderness. I'm the first one to react. I climbed to the wall that separated the house grounds from the animals. From there I could see almost all the houses nearby. My friends got right up after me. We stayed in total silence, waiting for another scream. And we heard it. This time we could understand what she said. Help. She yelled. Then a bunch of gibberish no one could really understand. One of my friends quickly grabbed his phone to call the police, as we assumed it could be domestic violence or a robbery. I grabbed my axe. My other friends followed me to the gate. We didn't leave. Nobody knew what we would find, since something sounded odd about those screams. Right before the police arrived, we heard a thud and then glass breaking. I assumed that it was a window. As soon as the police arrived, the screams stopped, never to be heard again. The police found nothing. Later that night, me and my friends stayed up, just chatting about what happened. One of them oddly quiet. When I asked him what was wrong, he simply said, "I've heard those screams before." Apparently he had heard that woman scream a couple of times while he was walking his dog. Next day we got up and decided to go check out the house the screams were coming from. But there was one thing weird about it when we arrived to this place. There was no house. It was forest terrain with nothing more than big trees and bushes. We came back and decided to forget about what happened, since we wanted to just have a good time. No one would ever relate this encounter to a skinwalker, obviously. I didn't either at first. But when it happened twice, I started connecting everything. The second encounter happened with my cousins over, similar to the previous night. We were having a good, peaceful dinner. That's when me and my cousin decided to go for a little walk in the garden that we had. The garden made a frontier with a huge forest, only separated by a small stone wall. We were just talking and laughing when I started to hear a man talking, not in a normal voice. Sounded like there was something in his throat that produced a weird voice frequency. Again, I go and grab my axe, and my cousin calls his sister. We got ourselves near the wall to hear what it was saying. Like the first encounter, we could only understand gibberish coming from him, and he would not stop talking, not even taking breaks to catch his breath. After a while of listening to it, we realized that we couldn't do anything about it, so we left and finished our dinner. They leave and I find myself alone in here. It was quiet, unsettling. Then I started overthinking more and more, and I remember the times that my dog would spend the entire nights barking at the forest, when all the existent animals there were wiped out by hunters. I remember the warnings that my parents gave me when I was a child, to always leave that forest and lock all the doors before sunset, regardless of my questions. They would never tell me why, because as I mentioned before, it was a calm little location in a calm country. I couldn't understand why so many worries. It all ended when the lumberjacks came to cut down all of the grown trees, leaving the forest pretty visible. Before the trees were cut down, you couldn't see shit in there, even during the daytime. After they cut the trees and the good weather came, nothing weird happened, and my dog stopped barking at the wall. I would like to know if I'm just being paranoid. To preface this, I'm somewhere in the middle of a skeptic and a believer in the paranormal. So take my story how you will. I'm just recounting what I saw. My dad is from a small village in southern Mexico, in the rainforest. A very third world country type of place. No internet, no hot water, and people still speak Mayan. When I was 18, we visited for the first time when he got his papers fixed, and it was a beautiful experience. The second day we were there was a Sunday, so everyone in the village went to church. We started meeting people, and a very old couple. I don't know what their age was, but they looked like they were 80 plus. They came up to us and started talking to us in Mayan. We don't know it, so our family is translating for us. And long story short, it turns out they are witches and they lived up in the mountains. Every Sunday they come down to church walking, and it takes them about 6 hours to get there and another 6 hours to get back. I brush this off and we go home. A few hours later, they showed up at my grandma's house. My aunt tells my dad, "You have to offer them something and they'll go away and leave you alone." So to play along, my dad does this. He gets 2 bags and fills it with food and drinks. They go on their way, but before they do, the lady walks up to my mom and tells her something in Mayan, with a big smile on her face. They left and my mom asked my aunt what she said. My aunt said the lady had told my mom, "I want to take you home with me and eat you." At this point, the whole situation is weird, and we're not really sure of what to think about this whole witch thing, but it's over. Or so I thought. At around 5:30 p.m., I was bored and decided to go for a little walk to the river about 15 minutes away. When I'm almost there, I noticed it started to get dark, and rain clouds had started to form. I was already almost there, so I decided to keep going. As soon as I get there, it starts to rain like crazy, and thunderstorms too. The sky is now completely dark, and there's no street lights out there of any sort, so it's pitch black. I started walking back, disappointed because I wanted to chill there. 5 minutes into my walk, back in the rain and the darkness, I saw a silhouette about 40 feet away. It was something on all fours, so I thought it was maybe just the family's dog. He would follow us wherever we walked. It seemed like a pretty big dog in this case. I wasn't alarmed. I walked closer and called out his name. As I get closer, I swear to God, I see this thing start to slowly go from all fours to standing up. Keep in mind it's pitch black out there, so all I'm really seeing is the silhouette. I'm not really freaking out at the moment. I think I was too shocked to have really reacted to what was going on. Now getting closer, this thing is standing up, walking. And what would you know? As we walk past each other, I can finally make out what it was. And it was the old witch lady from earlier. From there I speed walked home and never looked back. I told my family and they told me all of the stories of skinwalkers there, but they never believed in them. We never saw that old lady again after that. Not even at church the next week. I don't know what I saw, but my guess was that this lady is actually a witch, and she can skinwalk. So here's my true story, and I hope you enjoyed it. On August 22nd, 2010, my family and my friend all went up north to our cabin in Autrain Township, Michigan. My family had always gone up to the UP as a tradition in the late summer before the next school year started. I was 11 at the time and asked my mom if my friend Megan could come with us. We had been friends for quite some time, and our parents were friends as well. Our parents decided that she could go with us, and we were ecstatic. We were planning to stay up north for about a week. Everything went smoothly those first 6 days and nights. The last night, Megan and myself wanted to sleep outside in a tent. My mom wasn't on board with the idea, so she said we only could do it if my brother slept in a separate tent next to ours. That night, our tents were set up, and my brother was in his, and me and Megan were in ours. We heard my mom yell out, "I love you all. Stay safe tonight." We all replied that we loved her too, and she closed the cabin door behind her. My brother was completely silent afterwards. We figured that he had fell asleep. But Megan and I were whispering gossip to one another. Soon we were able to fall asleep. However, many hours later, I woke up to Megan tapping me on the shoulder. She said, "I have to pee, but I'll be right back. Okay?" Yeah, go," I told her. She unzipped the tent and walked inside. I couldn't go back to sleep, so I stayed there laying and waiting. I didn't have a watch with me, but I could tell about 10 minutes had passed since she had left. I decided I would go inside and check on her and get some snacks. I unzipped the tent and saw her standing about 4 feet away from the front of the tent, gazing at me with a blank stare. "I was coming to check on you and make sure you were okay." She didn't move. "What are you doing?" I said with a nervous laugh. I started walking closer to her. She still wasn't moving or saying anything. "Megan, what are you doing?" I said, getting closer to her. "Come on, this isn't funny. Let's just go back to sleep." I grabbed her hand, which was icy cold. It was the end of August, so that struck me as unusual. I lightly pulled on her, but she just wouldn't walk. She just continued to stare at me. I looked in her now dead eyes. She tilted her head and said, "Hi, Paige." But the voice didn't sound like hers. Something was off. I heard the back door to the cabin open, and I said to Megan, I'll be right back." I took off running to the back side of the house, hoping to find my mom to help me. I turned the corner, and Megan jumped back holding snacks. My eyes widened, seeing her there. There was absolutely no way that she could have made it all the way around the opposite side of the house and grabbed snacks in 7 seconds of my sprint. "Are you okay?" she asked. I tried to stammer out what just happened, but my mind was blank. "Okay, you weirdo. Let's go lay back down." "I just saw you," I blurted out loudly. "Yeah, I know. I'm right here." "No, I just ran away from you, and you're right here now." "You need some sleep. Come on." Thinking it was my own imagination, I walked back to the tent with Megan. When we turned the corner, there was nothing in front of the tent where I saw her before. She made fun of me, calling me crazy, which made me think that I was just tired and imagined the whole thing. I kept it to myself because I didn't want people thinking I was crazy. It wasn't until this day, October 17th, 2018, that I learned about skinwalkers. The Megan that was staring at me that night was not the real Megan. It was a skinwalker. Around 2007, I was getting my PhD at the University of Florida. I'm a 30-ish female. I lived in Gainesville in a condo that I owned myself. I had a friend who was walking across the United States. We'll call him Captain. Well, Captain decided to spend the winter at my house, so we got a mutual friend to drive him from Alabama, where he had last stopped walking, to my house in Gainesville. We had a pleasant Thanksgiving, and then Captain just kind of chilled at my house for the next several months. It wasn't too big of a deal, because I was mostly just staying at my boyfriend's house, but it was a little bit much. When it was time for him to get back to walking, he asked if I could drive him back to the exact location that he'd left off in Alabama. Looking forward to having my house back, I agreed to drive him one day when I was out of school. Now, I don't remember where the route was that we had taken, or where it was exactly, but I do remember that the drive wasn't that long, relatively speaking. It seems like it should have been, but I guess it was only about 5 to 6 hours one way. I dropped him off early in the evening, and then I headed back for Florida. This meant I was driving at night, by myself, in an unknown part of the country. Conveniently, the GPS technology that we had at the time gave me this extremely backwards route back to Florida. To get where we dropped off Captain, we stayed on the freeway for most of the time, and then it was 10 miles off of the freeway. Well, Google Maps or whatever this app was decided to run a faster way, which was taking me all over these back roads all through the Alabama backcountry. Serious Deliverance vibes. So, I'm already a little freaked out, and occasionally checking in on my boyfriend to let him know where I am. I've driven at night tons, but my history with respect for strangers has made me hypervigilant. At some point I became aware that there was a car behind me. I didn't assume that anything weird was happening until the car stayed with me for several miles. Again, I just shoved it off and just kept on driving. But because I was paying attention to this car behind me, I didn't notice when I pulled through some small town that I was taking a left at the wrong intersection. There were two intersections very close together, and I was accidentally in the left lane to turn left at the intersection before the one that I was supposed to turn at. No biggie, I figured. It's like 2 in the morning, so when the first light changed, I drove straight through the intersection and took a left at the next intersection. The car behind me did the same exact thing. I realized that at this point, I was definitely being followed. I immediately called my boyfriend and asked him if he could look up a non-emergency police number for that area code. I tried to give him the nearest location, but like any dude who has never been a victim to any kind of assault, he thought I was overreacting. He was in the middle of something, and therefore he didn't look up this number for me. In retrospect, I should have absolutely just called 911, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Just something that could have been nothing. But that nothing was quickly becoming something indeed, because I'd been all over these back roads of Alabama without a gas station, and my car definitely needed gas. That meant I would have to exit the vehicle at a gas station that was probably not well manned at this time of night, by myself, and I low-key was freaking out. It didn't help that I couldn't see the driver of the car behind me. It was dark and the car had dark tint on the windows. Also, Alabama back roads are pretty damn dark. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, but I couldn't see any glimpse of a driver. I honestly could not figure out why this person targeted me, and at first I had laughed at it. Why would this person be targeting me in the first place? I laughed it off as some kind of Southern football vendetta. I had a UF license plate for him. Go Gators. And I was trying to convince myself that this person was just trying to scare me because he was probably from one of the rival schools. Given that I am a tall woman, I have been very difficult to identify that I am a woman in the car. But either way, this person was clearly following me. And given the fact that I had to stop my car, I was feeling increasingly at risk. Finally, my backwards route took me into a relatively large metropolitan area. I was finally on streets with streetlights, and the businesses were still lit up. I started to feel a little bit safer, but I still had to stop for gas. I had already made a plan that was as far as that concerned, but I wanted this guy behind me to know that I was onto him. So at the first intersection that was lit, I turned fully around in my car seat, stared at him while pretending to talk on the phone. I did this for the entire time that the light was red. I wanted it to look like I was describing his car and his features to whoever I was on the phone with. Not long after this, I found a gas station that was pretty well lit. I was driving on fumes and praying that I wouldn't run out of gas in the backwoods of Alabama. I pulled into this gas station so that my driver's side was adjacent to the door of the gas station. I jumped out and ran inside. I let the attendant know that I was being followed, and he walked from behind the counter and walked up to the window and said that no one was there. I was sure that that car had been behind me the entire time. When I pulled into the gas station, they must have just driven off when I ran. I still have no idea what this guy's intentions was, but he followed me for easily an hour and a half, and like at least 100 miles. It definitely felt predatory as hell. Thankfully, I was able to get gas in my car under a watchful eye of this gas station attendant, and the attendant told me the quickest way to the freeway. My trip was uneventful after that, but I was still shaken and thoroughly pissed off that my boyfriend was not taking me seriously. Stay safe out there. I'm still pretty jarred from this experience, but I figured it would be easier to share about it than just keep dwelling on it. A couple of days ago, someone broke into my house while I was asleep. I work night shift, so sleeping during the day is something you learn to get used to. Around 6:30 p.m., I heard what I thought was a large knocking sound coming outside, and my dogs were going absolutely ballistic. For reference, I live on a farm out of the middle of nowhere. My closest neighbor is about half a mile away. But back to the story. I somewhat wake up, but don't really think anything of it, since my neighbors like to shoot their guns, and this was during the hunting season. As I started falling back asleep, my heart started fluttering, like I knew something wasn't right. That's when I heard large footsteps that were very loud throughout the house. The dog was still barking, but started to quiet down. That's when I really began to worry. The footsteps stop on the other side of my bedroom door and don't move. I think this is how I'm going to die, to be honest. And although I had a weapon in my room, I knew I couldn't get it without being heard. It felt like an eternity before the steps started moving around towards my brother's room. Rustling can be heard loudly through the house, and things being thrown. I knew they were in my brother's room. Some of his friends are into seedy situations, and I knew that it had to be one of them. I heard footsteps coming back to my door, and the doorknob handle started to move. I immediately turned my back towards the door and closed my eyes tight. A hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. The door opens, but that's it. Then he leaves as a car drives down the road. I finally bucked up my courage to get out of bed. Everything in my house except for my brother's room was undisturbed. I immediately called my brother to ask if any of his friends were coming over. He said not that he knew of, and I told him what happened. He got off the phone with me and started calling around. I went back to bed and noticed that I still had my window cracked open from earlier, and realized I had my sheet off while I was wearing an oversized t-shirt to bed. If it was who I think it was, this wasn't a random event. One of my brother's friends has always had his eyes on me, and the fact that he saw me sleeping, and in just the shirt, makes me freak out. Whether or not he took something out of my brother's room, or knew that I was home alone sleeping, before having to work later that night, I don't know. I'll post an update if I hear anything from my brother. You move out of the country just to get away from the activity of the city life and let your guard down. That's when something like this happens. Sometimes country life isn't so safe after all. Update. Sorry y'all for the late update. It's been a crazy week, but thank you for bearing with me. My brother got back to me with some news. I absolutely dreaded hearing it. None of his friends said or claimed that they had been to the house at that time. So now I'm even more afraid of who it was that was in my home and what their intentions were. They could have been scoping out my house during the day, now that my county decided to extend the gravel of my road that connects to the farm community I live near. I just hope that I don't have another visit like that anytime soon. But if there is a next time, I'll be sure to be ready for them. So this story is from when I was about 12 years old. I'm 18 now. The setting of the story is around January in rural Minnesota. If anyone's ever been there, you know there isn't anything besides trees, honestly, or the farmland and snow in the upper Minnesota. One day, about an hour before sunset, my brother and I were outside playing in the snow, as usual, and I decided that I wanted to go explore the woods and make a fort. My brother was very paranoid as a little kid, so he wouldn't come with me. As I'm trekking through our little snow-covered alfalfa field, towards the woods, right in front of me, are some tiny bare footprints. Human footprints. I look behind me to see where they came from. The road. Before anyone says that deer tracks are similar to human feet, I've seen deer tracks almost 100 times before. Also, these steps look bipedal. Walking on two legs, for those that don't know. We have no neighbors for at least 3/4 of a mile. As I'm looking through these tracks, I see that they lead to the woods. I remember getting a bad feeling, but my little dumbass decided that I would follow them anyway. No joke, I followed those footprints for at least 1/4 of a mile into the woods. I started feeling sick as I saw the footprints cross the barbed wire without a sign of struggle and straight into the big brush of what I assumed someone dumped there at some point. Was there something that was leading me there? I didn't want to know. I look at the big brush pile one more time to see that kid's footprints, never leaving that brush. I ran all the way back home and I felt like I was being watched. Thinking back on it, I wish I explored that brush pile, but at the same time, who knows what I would have found. Thanks for reading my story. First post here. This just happened about an hour ago, so my memory is very fresh. First off, I live in a very rural spot, in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. You can drive there about 5 minutes, and also about a 10-minute walk from the nearest town. If you cross the street, it takes you about 10 minutes of a walk to reach the forest. First Christmas Day. In the afternoon, my partner and I decided that we would take a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all of the food. It was about 1700 and already dark when we left, and we had a big bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love to take pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk down the little country road towards the forest, then turn right, following a small gravel cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village to the next one, which is maybe a 15 to 20-minute walk. In the middle of the part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw the flashlight reflecting something and recognized that it was a car being parked in the middle of the track, close to the trees. This kind of struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive on this track. It's a very narrow place, and it's very hidden, so I was a bit cautious of this. My partner pointed that the light inside of the car was on, and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed that the windows were frozen over, so it must have been parked there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure in front of it, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it, so I can focus better on the photography and get it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, there is someone standing behind us, in the middle of the road. He's looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening, and close to the border of the forest, there are boars, sometimes, and mating season as well. So they are more aggressive than usual. But lo and behold, indeed there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's range. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first I thought he might have been startled, as it may be a little bit weird that somebody's out here taking pictures around his car. It wasn't even legal to drive on this path of the car, so I decided that I would get up and confront him from this distance away, explaining to him that I was taking photos of the tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light or any help or anything, and he replied that wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm. Nonetheless, but my partner decided to just get the fuck out of there and followed the path leading to the next village. It was maybe about 5 to 7 minutes away until we reached it. I remembered the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and Googled it, and turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is a very strict lockdown right now, so you were only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around and going back inside. I was able to see that he was parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery had died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then. But I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all of the details. Big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows, plus him having no light and not responding. He did seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down and took that photo. I think I was very lucky that I had my partner, the camera, and a bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have possibly happened if I was alone. So creepy guy, sneaking around in the forest. Let's not meet. Edit. When I told my housemate, she theorized that he was out there spying on other houses, very close to the forest border, as you could easily see in the backyards without even being seen. I had the thought of photographing that car when I entered the forest, but somehow I felt unwell, and I didn't decide on doing it because I had a gut feeling, despite it being an interesting scene. In hindsight, I believe this saved me, as he must have been hidden behind the trees, close to the car in the forest entrance. If he was really planning on a burglary or worse, dumping a body or something, I think it's not likely he may have attacked me if he realized I had potential photos of his car and recognized his license plate. Hello everyone. I wanted to say thank you for watching and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you would like to see more of these, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe. We're doing nothing but growing. And if you would like to, become a channel member today. There's going to be a lot of bonus content, including like extra stories, creepier stories that a lot of people wouldn't like because of how intense it gets. And also bloopers, because you guys aren't going to want to miss the amount of times I mess up in stories, especially with one of the stories that are in this video. I'm not going to name which one, but I guess you can kind of assume which one. Also, make sure to check out the links in my description as well, like my Twitter, Instagram, and my Gmail if you would like to submit a story. I would love to tell some subscriber stories, so make sure to drop them there. There's going to be a lot more content and a lot more coming, just know that. But other than that, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one. I laughed for like 3 or 5 minutes at one of those stories. That sounds really messed up. But I guess you guys could kind of figure out which one. But it was still a good story. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now. Okay, love you, bye.